And it really just blows my mind that when we're in an economy where people are worried about deportation, when they're worried about putting food on the table, when they're talking about making living wages, that on the other side of that same conversation, we talk about spending thousands of dollars to go see a football game. Happy New Year and welcome to Into the Desert, exploring the wilderness of ideas. Don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons. We need your support. Become a fellow adventurer by supporting this channel's mission of encouraging discussion and not division on Patreon. The link is in the description. So, Elgin, I know this is something we've talked about in the past, and it's something that you and I disagree with. And I thought this would be a great start of the year to show people how to have a conversation with people that you disagree with. And this topic isn't as divisive as some of the political topics out there, but I've heard people on both sides, and it is a very divisive conversation. So it's coming up on Super Bowl. And when we start talking about Super Bowl, we start talking about the ads and how much revenue is spent on the ads and how much tickets cost to go see the Super Bowl. And it really just blows my mind that when we're in an economy where people are worried about deportation, when they're worried about putting food on the table, when they're talking about making living wages, that on the other side of that same conversation, we talk about spending thousands of dollars to go see a football game. We pay our football players millions of dollars a year. We pay actors and, entertainers millions of dollars. You want to go to Las Vegas and you want to see the Wizard of Oz in a nearly 4D globe theater, you're going to spend over $300 a person just to go see a movie. And it just makes me wonder, what's wrong with our society that we spend so much money on entertainment and yet complain that we can't afford food or house or rent or all of this? Our priorities are so messed up. And I don't think we're putting our money where our values supposedly are. And if you think about education and our poor teachers and how for years, decades, they haven't been able to afford things like paper and copies for their students. You've got school districts that are using books from forever ago because they can't afford new books, or, the kids can't have laptops, and, this is our future. These kids are going to be the ones ruling this world, and we're spending next to no money on them. And yet we're spending hundreds and millions of dollars on entertainment. So obviously, I think there's something wrong with our society, and I think we need to reprioritize. And I know you kind of disagree with me. So why don't you explain your side of it?
Well, I think you've mixed a lot of things together in there. Ron, we spend a lot of money on education. I don't have the stats in front of me, but we literally spend billions on education. I think the fundamental difference between, let's just take, for sake of argument, let's just take football and education, right? Football players get paid a lot of money. Teachers don't get paid a lot of money. They do fairly well. Most teachers, obviously starting salaries are low, but that's the same in all industries. And by the time you've been in the teacher for a few years, teachers, they do just fine. At least a lot of them do. When I was teaching, the teachers around me I was there as a substitute. The teachers around me, they were full-time teachers. And, they would sit in the break room. They would talk about going up to their cabin on the weekend and doing this and, doing that. They had money and they were living nice, good middle-class lives. Nowhere near what a football player gets paid, but there's a significant difference in terms of economics on a football player and a teacher. And that comes down simply to the numbers involved. It's literally basic supply and demand. Uh, with football players, you have a very small number of people who can actually play at the professional level. And you have a massive amount of people, literally millions of people, who are interested in looking and watching those games. When you go to a teacher, you have one teacher and 20 students, 30 students in a large classroom. I would argue it's too large, 40 students. So you've got to spread your costs out. So for the teacher, you're having to spread the costs out over the 40 students and of course the taxpayers behind them in their community. Um, but the community has to support lots of classrooms, not just one. So by the time you start bringing in the money, you're drawing from a very small set of taxpayers compared to the global reach of football. So what are you going to do? It's just simple supply and demand. You have millions of people willing to spend money to watch a small number of games that only play a part time during the year. So why shouldn't the football players uh, be compensated? Where does the money go? It goes to football players. It also goes to people that man the stadiums. It goes to all the businesses that benefit from that. So when you look at the impact of an individual player, you're talking how an individual player is affecting millions of people. When you talk about the impact of an individual teacher, individual teacher is impacting, maybe 100 people by the time you take the families and the classes. And, so that's where the discrepancy in money gets in large part. It's simple supply and demand, simple economics. Um, Even if you
And I
conclude that,
understand the economics of this. I understand that this is how the world works. And we are in a system that is kind of guaranteeing that kind of disparity between entertainment and things of real value like teaching.
yeah,
But it wasn't always that way. If you go back in time, not that saying back in time is any better than today, it has its pros and cons, don't get me wrong. But when we look at, let's say, baseball, right? Because it's a sport I know more about than football. But if you look at baseball and you look at, back when Babe Ruth was playing and Jackie Robinson and Satchel Paige and all of the greats that we still today talk about as these wonderful players, they were basically living, foot to mouth, right? Hand to mouth, whatever the saying is,
yeah,
right? They didn't make much money, and you could go see a baseball game for like 15 cents, and it seemed more accessible than today. Now, if I want to go to a baseball game, as much as I love baseball, it's like an event. It's it costs money, and it has parking, and then there's everything at the stadium, and it's this big, huge corporate event instead of hanging out on a Saturday afternoon and watching your favorite players, or you get off work on early on a day, and you can just go catch the baseball game in the summertime and, kind of good, cheap, wholesome fun. Now it's this, they're night games and they're televised and they've made this whole corporation around it. And I feel like we as citizens have allowed this to happen. We have allowed these big, huge conglomerates that rack up the prices, that rack up what's expected. And truthfully, I'd rather go watch AA baseball because it's back to more of that, you just go and have fun on those in the summertime and they have all these fun little events and, it's really just for the joy of the game instead of this big, massive, the world stakes on the line with these professional sports. And I feel like that's the problem. We've allowed our priorities to get so skewed that you can't go to a concert, you can't go to a sports event, you can't go to anything, a movie even, without almost spending $100. And that's if you do it cheap, And I feel like that's wrong when we can barely afford rent.
Well, if you can barely afford rent, you're probably not the people that are going to the game. There's a number of different issues that you brought up in those comments. For one, you got to be careful comparing prices in the 20s, 30s, and 40s to today, because there is inflation. Inflation is not a recent event. Inflation, a low level of inflation, has been going on for a very long time, and therefore prices go up. So yeah, you paid, maybe, I don't know what the prices were. Let's take your suggested price of 15 cents. So maybe at one point you paid 15 cents, but you probably weren't getting paid very much either. And so the cost of your wage, how much you had to work to be able to afford to a game, probably hasn't changed all that much. On the other hand, one of the things that has changed is over the same period, after the end of World War II in the early 50s, after the effects of the war were largely gone, poverty in the United States was still around 30%. And what happened was over the next 15, 20 years, the rate of poverty was cut in half down to 15. So we have far, far fewer people who are poor today. And those who are poor today get far more benefits than they did before. So being poor in the United States today is not the same as being poor in the United States in the 1950s. And before that, you had the World War II and the Great Depression. So it's even significantly different there. So the level of society has raised in the sense that people have more money to spend on football game, whatever, baseball games, and the types of entertainment. So the percentage of income for entertainment has gone up. Those people are out there competing. The other big thing you touched on was nowadays games are televised. So back in the 40s, your city had to be able to support your team. And if your city didn't support the team, that didn't provide the money, then your team couldn't survive. So they had to work with a limited amount of money that they could derive from that city. The bigger cities had more pay, but they still were competing in a general market. Nowadays we have television. All the games are televised. And that's where a lot of the real money is in sports. It's in the televised games and the advertising and the Super Bowl. I mean, the reason that Super Bowl commercials cost so much is because they're hitting a very, very large audience. And so there's actually competition to get, ads in onto the Super Bowl because they just cost a lot of money to do that. That's going to impact the game. Where does that money going to go? Well, it goes to the players. It goes again to the wages of the people who do the concession stands, the people who take tickets, the people who do the marketing. All this money spreads out into the community. You also said, we've allowed this to happen. And that's the other big issue in this is, okay, let's assume for sake of argument that we think it's wrong, right? That a baseball player gets paid millions, whereas a teacher doesn't. And there's only two ways to solve that. One, you can limit the amount of money that a baseball player gets or a football player or a movie star, or you can raise the amount that teachers get. But again, you've got that fundamental economic problem of if you raise the teacher's salary, right, where does the money come from? How do you get them? You end up impacting the local community. Like I said, we're spending billions on education, and it's a significant part of the budget. So a lot of that comes from property taxes. So are you going to raise the property taxes, thus raising the cost of people's rent, potentially forcing people to out of their homes? So this is what happened in the 1970s in California, is property taxes went up so much that people who had paid off their homes and retired on fixed income and doing very nicely suddenly found themselves getting evicted from their homes because they couldn't keep up with the increase of property taxes.
Yeah, and we're
So
having
it's
that
always
problem
going
here
to,
in Madison right now for the same exact reason.
yeah. So again, it's just basic economics. And there's two issues. One is, why is the situation the way it is? Well, the situation for a a sports athlete or for a movie star or whatever, an entertainer, right? They're marketing what they do to a very large number of people. And then there's a large competition to why are stadiums seats cost so much? Because it's hard to get into them because so many people, obviously you're not very popular, you're not going to fill a stadium. But for the people that fill stadiums routinely, uh, the, there's big competition for people to try and get those seats, which is why the cost is so much.
But see, you bring up a really good point, and this is something I think we do agree on, is that the structure of the entertainment business is in such a way that they keep elevating the experience. So like I said, you get the big huge stadiums, you get the big name people that show up, you get the higher level of talent. There's just so much more that goes into the game.
Yeah.
And
I remember I remember talking to a guy I worked with. He had gone to a concert over in Minneapolis, and they had literally filled the stadium. It was I believe it was, don't quote me on this, but I believe it was a German rock band. I had not heard of them, but
Ramstein. I don't know how you pronounce that.
okay, yeah, that sounds about right. But he was talking happened to be with one of the pilots for the planes. They brought over 747s full of people, staff, equipment, and everything to come over and stage this show.
Yeah.
And yeah, think about the money and logistics involved in setting that up. So yeah, you see, someone walks out on stage and sings a song and gets paid millions of dollars. No, there's a heck of a lot more that goes into that. And it's not just walking out on stage and singing. Yeah, if you're
But see, I think that goes
already
back to my point, though. We have set up the entertainment industry so that we have a situation where our football players and our singers and our entertainers, our movie stars, directors, they make millions of dollars for their craft because they do a good job. I'm not actually saying we shouldn't be paying them that kind of money, but
yeah,
I think we've set up our support staff. So again, our teachers, our firemen, our police officers, the people who are supposed to protect us. They're supposed to keep us safe. They're supposed to elevate our society. Now, there's a whole bunch that can go into when you talk about police. Are they doing that? Are they not? And I don't want to go into that conversation. But from an ideal perspective, our teachers, our firemen, our police officers, our public servants, our mayors, our elected officials, right? They're supposed to elevate our society. Their job is to take us towards a goal of a better society, but they're set up in a structure that doesn't allow for people to do that unless it's something that drives them. They do it because they want to, not necessarily because there's a perk or a benefit to it, right? There's usually some other reason why someone goes into those fields, and I think that causes an issue where, we don't necessarily get the best people because there are a lot of really good people that are probably very qualified to elevate those positions that don't go into it because their situation doesn't allow them for it, right? They can't afford to be a police officer. They can't afford to be a paramedic. They can't afford to be a teacher. So they go
well,
into other positions that offer them more financial security.
I'm that I'm I would have to see some actual statistics, and because quite frankly, most of government workers do very well. They are normally upper middle class, right? Which, when you consider, I mean, mechanics do a valuable job. I mean, people always, pretty much everybody working does a valuable job of some sort.
Yes, but when you talk about our entertainment industry, you're talking about people who are at the best of their field. We are attracting the best talent when we talk about
No,
football and entertainment.
no. For sports, yes, but there's no concept of that for a teacher. There's no concept of that. I'm not even sure how you would set one up where you go to what? Junior league. You go to a high school and you play on high school police force. And then when you graduate, you go to the college police force. And then you go to minor league police force. And then eventually you work your way up to where you're the pinnacle of the police. That doesn't make sense.
No,
You
it
have,
doesn't.
well,
But
that's
you
what
could
happens
set
in
up things
sports.
where, like with teachers, again, municipal services, I find it really hard to figure out how you get the best of the best for a situation like that. And maybe someone else out there is more brilliant than I am and has a solution to how to bring it back. But like for
Well, you
teachers,
could do
it's
merit pay
really
for
easy if you
teachers.
do competition, if you open up, and I know you and I have talked about this a number of times, if we do some sort of system where parents have the choice of where their kids go to school, and the schools that have the best teachers are going to get children, the best children to go there, and it'll
Yeah.
elevate everybody because now everybody's competing for, again, you have a small society, the small number of kids that can fit into a classroom. So you're going to want to be the best because you're going to want to fill up your classroom, and that competition will help bring out the best.
Well, yeah, but it's a simple fact that most teachers, government school teachers, right? They're in teachers unions, and the teacher unions routinely oppose merit pay. They oppose
Exactly.
competition. They oppose all this, and then they want raises anyway. So how do you do? How can you fix the system to allow for good teachers to excel if the teachers themselves are saying don't do that, and but give
Exactly.
us more money anyway? So there are solutions. You're never going to get to the point that well, maybe not never is a long time, but in the near future, you're not going to get to a point where the star teachers are getting paid as much as the star athletes or the movie stars or the entertainers.
Yeah,
But
but we are customers, right? As a person with kids of my own, right? I am a customer of the school district. So if I go to, let's say, Taco Bell, right? And I don't like their service, right? I don't think it's clean enough. I don't think the food is of good quality. I can choose not to go to Taco Bell anymore, and I can take my service away from them. And it kind of doesn't matter what the employees union says because, as without having a customer, I'm not going to do that. I can't do the same with the teachers union.
no, you can't because you're not the customer.
But
I
shouldn't
mean,
I
in
be?
a true, the customer is the person who provides the money and gets the service. But when you go to a school, you're not directly providing the money. You are getting this. Your child is getting the service, but there's a split there. The person who pays the money is the local school board, the government, local government there, with support from the federal government. So when you go to Taco Bell, they have an incentive to make sure you're pleased because you are not only getting the service, you're providing the money. But when you go to your local school, you may be getting the service, but it's the government that's providing the money. So the government is the real
But the
customer.
government only gets their money through my taxes.
But those are mandatory. Do you get a choice as to whether you want to pay your taxes or not?
Well, yeah, but the consequences of me not.
Well, let's put it this way. If you don't want to pay your bill and therefore don't go to Taco Bell or whatever, McDonald's or whatever restaurant you want to go to, they're not going to send out their own police force to make sure you come to their uh, establishment and buy things from them.
Yeah. But
That's
I
you
think that
have the
comes
freedom.
back
You do
to
not have
my,
the freedom. Yeah, you do not have the freedom to do that with the government. The
but I
government
think that
mandates
comes
it.
back to my original point. I think that there is a big disparity, and we as citizens of this country have let it happen, that we have let a system come about where entertainment makes millions of dollars, and those that are designed to elevate our society and make us better a better society can kind of do whatever they want without us having a say. Because I think as a society, so many of us don't pay attention to local politics, don't pay attention to state politics, and only barely pay attention to federal politics. And they have this idea that, well, the president is the end all be all of politics, so that's the only one that matters. And that's absolutely not the case. And I don't know if it's because we have a bad education system that people aren't seeing the value of being more involved in the lower level political decisions, or if we're just too apathetic. But either way, society has split its priorities in a way that I feel like is fundamentally flawed.
Well, it may be, but you're going to have two different issues here. There's one is it a bad thing? But with baseball, with entertainers, with movies, with whatever, you have complete choice. You don't have to go to a baseball game. You don't have to go to a movie. You don't have to listen to an entertainer, right? That whether they do well or not is largely up to you, and you have choice as to whether you want to engage in it or not. When you're dealing with teachers, public servants, things like that, that choice isn't there. And that choice implies constraints that limit things that lack of choice does. So you're not, their main focus is to please the government that pays them, not to provide you a good service. And generally, whatever government does wastes a lot of money. We're seeing that all over the place with fraud these days and with everything going on. Anything government does costs a lot more and wastes a lot more than it does if it's done in the private sector, where there's a incentive to please the customer. So, yeah, you can say baseball players or football players or whatever get paid a lot of money, but that's because millions of individual people have made choices that allows that money to be there. When you talk about a government system like police or teachers or whatever, you don't have the same level of choice. You don't have the same quality. And the base to pull from is much different. Baseball player plays in a stadium with thousands of people watching and millions on TV. A teacher teaches in a classroom with 20 people.
Yeah. So what do you guys think? Do you think our society is working perfectly and our imbalance of pay between entertainment and our social services is what it's supposed to be? Or are you kind of more along with mine and think that we as a society have kind of got off course somewhere and now we have an issue that I don't know if we can ever resolve? Let us know down in the comments. Also, let us know what you think about this new format. If this is something that's worthwhile, if you'd like to see more of these videos, we'd love to hear from you. If you made it this far, consider watching one of our other videos and supporting our channel on Patreon. Thank you for watching Into the Desert, exploring the wilderness of ideas. And to our fellow adventurers out there, a special thank you for helping to support our channel out on Patreon.